The surprise announcement last Friday by Prime Minister Modi that the government was withdrawing all three controversial farm laws has taken everyone by quite a bit of surprise. It's been a shock to some and a matter of celebration to others. Obviously, farmer groups and those who were pushing for the withdrawal of these controversial laws are very happy, but many of those groups have decided to dig in their heels and extend their list of demands to other matters regarding the agricultural sector. On the other side of the spectrum are those who are trying to make it sound like this was a great political masterstroke, but many are questioning whether this sounds the death knell for the pace of reforms we have seen under this particular government in its second term. After all, this is a government which has pushed through politically tough decisions and reforms, including the goods and service tax, which was hanging fire for several years. And this, in a sense, has been their calling card. So why the U-turn on agricultural reforms, or what was pitted as agricultural reforms? What does it mean for other sticky and politically difficult reforms like land acquisition in this country for industrial use? What does it mean for a true implementation of labor reforms? Well, to speak on some of these issues, I'm joined today by Yamini Aiyar, President and Chief Executive at the Center for Policy Research. Siraj Hussain, former Agricultural Secretary, joins me on the show. And I'm also speaking this evening with Madhavan Narayanan, Senior Journalist. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us on the India Development Debate. Yamini, how do you look at the decision which was made on the 19th? Now, those who critique the government will possibly say that, look, they had to give in to what was a year-long protest where farmer groups held strong. But at the same note, there are many who are saying that why was this withdrawal imperative? Was it a disappointment to some? How do you look at it?
I think there are obvious political calculations behind the decision that was taken on Friday, the choice of the day, the looming critical elections that are coming. But beyond that, I looked at the decision from the point of view of critical lessons that we need to learn about what it means to undertake complex factor reforms in India. The first, most crucial one is actually a political lesson, which is about the importance of following democratic processes of consensus building at the heart of any kind of reform. You spoke just now about GST. It has many flaws in its implementation, but it came at the back of years, in fact, decades of painstaking efforts at consensus building. And crucially, it brought states on board to make a unique sacrifice. To get the GST through, states had to significantly sacrifice fiscal autonomy. Agriculture was and remains a state subject. The states have taken some steps towards reform, perhaps not as fast as many others would like. But in these three laws, states were ridden roughshod, and states were not part of the consensus building process. There is a reason why agriculture is a state subject, the variation, the diversity, all of which means that for the central government to push reform without consensus building, and actually to try and push reform on matters that are fundamentally state subjects, ends up being in a place where no one is happy. The third, and I think crucial lesson in all of this is complex factor market reforms require us to move away from established templates. Markets are complex in India, making markets work for the diversity and the dynamism and complexity of what different parts of India look like, particularly agricultural markets, means in some places you need more state, in some places you need less state. And in all of this, we need a new framework to understand what it means to actually make agricultural markets work. None of this was reflected in the framing of the law. I don't think anybody argues that agriculture doesn't need serious reform. The question is what reforms, in which part of the country, and in what form. So to me, this entire episode should be a reminder that there is no one template of reform for India. It is a complex question, especially when it comes to complex factor markets. It is a process that requires consensus building and deliberation. It is fundamentally a federal process, which means that the center has to play an important role in building the institutional structure to ensure that states and center can deliberate to come up with an appropriate articulation of pathways of reform, which will vary. Tamil Nadu and Punjab and Bihar are all three very different states with three very different agricultural experiences, and therefore very different kinds of reforms that are needed. What's most worrying about where we are today is that the debate on agricultural reform and what needs to be done has now been pushed back 2 decades, if not more. We should be very careful to ensure that both as technocrats and as our politics, we don't allow fear of reform to take over. Rather, we come up with a better template and a new vocabulary for reforming agriculture.
But you know, if you look at the whole journey of the controversial farm laws, and Mr. Siraj Hussain, you and I have had several occasions to speak about them as we tracked first the passing of the laws, the way they were passed, then the very strong resistance from farmers. The Supreme Court then had to step in. Through all of this, the broad consensus, even those who were bitterly opposing it, agreed that something needs to be done about the way Indian agriculture is run. Nobody is really happy with what it is. The solutions are on a broad spectrum. The biggest common complaint was that not everyone has been taken on board. Do you think that is true? That not enough attempt was made to bring everyone on board despite the several meetings that were announced by the central government? And at the end of the day, do you agree with Yamini's point that this has pushed back agricultural reform by at least 2 decades? If this government with such a huge majority couldn't do it, it's doubtful anyone else will dare.
Actually, discussions with the state government have been going on ever since the model law was circulated by the Vajpayee government in 2003. However, these laws were promulgated as ordinances during the peak period of pandemic in June 2020. So that created a doubt in the mind of many various people, various stakeholders. The reforms are not dead. It will be up to the state governments to come up with various alternatives. And if a state government wants, for example, not to levy mandi charges or mandi fee in area outside the jurisdiction of APMC, the state can easily do it. Amend their APMC Act or bring a new legislation before the state assembly and pass that. So it would be entirely up to the state government, as it should be. As Yamini has mentioned, that is the constitutional scheme. Now, having said this, the road to reforms in agriculture is quite difficult. In fact, there are so many stakeholders with contradictory objectives, etc. So I'll just give you a very simple example relating to today. Now, what is happening is that the MSP of soybean is 3,950 rupees. Market price is 6,000 rupees. Now, should the government enable the farmers to realize 6,000 rupees? The farmers would like that. The poultry industry wants that it should be allowed to import the entire quantity of 12 lakh tons of soya meal, which was allowed last year, out of which only 6 lakh tons have come. So there is a contradiction between what the farmers want, what poultry industry wants, and what the Solvent Extractors Association is demanding. You know, SOPA is demanding that government should not allow any import. So government has to deal with these contradictions all the time. The reforms in agriculture are quite complex, and therefore they need much more discussion, intense consultation. And in any case, the center almost withdrew the amendment in the Essential Commodities Act for various reasons. So also, I have mentioned 6 points in my article yesterday on which, some consensus needs to be urgently reached. I will mention only 1 point here: how to address the issue of water in Punjab and Haryana.
The question is whether this will be revisited. Madhavan, let me come to you with that. If the main propeller behind this withdrawal or this U-turn was political compulsion, and that is very easy for anyone to decipher. It's no big guessing game that elections around the corner in Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, although the BJP doesn't have much stake in Punjab relatively. They don't really have too many seats there. Do you think they will revisit this at a later date? For example, if what their aim is to be re-elected in 2024, if that actually happens, then they have enough reason to revisit? Or is this now dead in the water, at least for the next 2 decades, as Yamini says?
No. I think I would not, I like the way Yamini described and defined the problem. And also Siraj mentioned some very interesting points. But the fact remains that you never say never in politics, or for that matter in economics. What is clear to me is that there has been a triumph of useless political will over meaningful political consensus. And all I have to do is to point out that 2 excellent reforms that have been done in the past that can be a role model for how to go about agriculture. One is, of course, the GST, in which there has been an attempt towards consensus right from the beginning. Whereas Mr. Modi took a state subject and applied his famous personality-oriented political will and thought it would work. Because I think there has been too much drawing room discussions among market-friendly experts to glorify political will without realizing that in a complex demographic where stakeholder reconciliation is very critical, particularly where you are trying to undo 40 years of a certain kind of a practice, there has to be A, creativity, B, a roadmap, and C, a reconciliation of stakeholder interest. None of this has happened in the case of the reform. And as long as these 3 principles are followed, I believe reforms are alive and kicking. But, for instance, there is a model agriculture law that's being talked, but there is also the Swaminathan Commission report. How do you reconcile these 2 in a fiscally challenged economy in which big farmers and small farmers are different kind of groups, commercial farming and old-fashioned environmentally increasingly threatened paddy or sugarcane is a threat? This involves complex negotiations just like GST. So let me give you an example that I have seen as an IT journalist. Remember the Software Technology Parks of India granted 100% income tax exemption to software companies. Yeah. But, all along when they started booming, Mr. Narayan Murthy of Infosys got into trouble for saying, look, we want to pay taxes. Now, nobody likes to lose revenue and profit. And if the IT industry could be pampered for about a decade, why can't relatively less affluent farmers and larger in numbers demographically not be put through a similar roadmap? Because the STPI had a sunset clause. So there should have been a sunset clause oriented approach towards both, freeing up as well as MSP. And that kind of, there have been too much of recommendations and not enough of design in the way we go about reforms. And there has been a willful derecognition of a political economy as an idea. This is to sound very fashionable at Davos and places like that. I'm sorry to say this, but, will you let the triumph of just slogans over hard ground reality? Would you rather reach slightly slower to the right destination than get into a traffic jam after speeding fast? This is the analogy I would use. And let me conclude by saying it's not over yet. There is fiscally, we are much more stronger than the experts are trying to say. And I think if you look at the buoyancy in GST, if you look at the recovery in the economy, if you look at the number of unicorns, if you're looking at the fact that overall there's a positive demographic input, there's a lot of elbow room for the government to take some of the fiscal blows on its chin and use that with a roadmap. Roadmap is what I want to say. There has been no roadmap on this. There has been only expert committee recommendations and a so-called political will which has been exposed bear right now. So I would say if the government takes a 5-year roadmap and lays it out.
So, quick follow up. Madhavan. Do you think this emboldens opposition parties in the states that are going to elections, or does it weaken their stance now that something like the farm law seems to be off the table? Because if this was done for political reasons, does it truly help the BJP?
It doesn't help the BJP, but I would not say it helps the opposition right away. Mr. Modi has a composite image that goes beyond reform, just agriculture or one or two issues, and the opposition is still not talking consensus or unity in a certain way. But let us have no illusions. The opposition will keep on hitting at Mr. Modi, whether he likes it or not. So they will be finding loopholes in whatever he does, even if he's backtracking, as we've seen this week. Everything from compensation to farmers who lost their lives to baking in their minimum support price will continue to be critical in a political sense. But I would like to point out to the fact that Nitish Kumar, the Bihar Chief Minister, has been the most muted in reacting to the repeal of the farm laws. Because Bihar farmers probably had the highest stakes one of the highest stakes in the way the reforms were being carried out, because they have not been properly commercialized before. Whereas what we are going through is defanging of a certain muscle that was given to Punjab and Haryana and Western UP because of the food security issues that were there in the 60s and 70s. So politically speaking, what it means is that there is a balancing act to be done with a roadmap. And I don't see Mr. Modi on the back foot unless there is an inflation or something or unemployment issue that raised its head. I don't rule it out, but I don't think it has anything to do with farm laws, perhaps. But it is more of a secular, cyclical nature in the economy.
All right.
Except that one U-turn
is not too much of a chink in the armor, is what Madhavan believes. Let me come back to the core question of this debate. And Yamini, let me return to you. The question we started with, is this going to cast a pall on other reforms that need to be done? As we're moving relatively closer to the next general elections, 2022 is a year of very crucial state elections, and then by, I guess, starting of 23 or end of 22, you're going to be in mood for the next general elections. So can we expect, or is the feeling that many have, that reforms will be put in the deep freeze for some time a correct one?
I think that, this could serve as a corrective in that if we have to do reforms, we have to get the process right and build collective consensus and ensure that the right level of government is pushing to reform in the right form. It doesn't mean that this puts a stop to all reform, but yes, it gives credence to the argument, the political argument that good economics makes for bad politics, and that's a problem. And here I think I do want to add one more corrective. When we're talking about the farm laws, we are largely saying good direction, bad politics in terms of how we are interpreting the repeal of the laws. But it is worth asking whether these were the right reforms, or these were the reforms that were needed, and was it for the central government to do them in the first place? To my mind, these may not have been the most essential. It was essential reforms in the sense that several states had already done various reforms around the APMC. Bihar was mentioned a moment ago. Bihar in 2006 had infamously got rid of its APMC laws. And in fact, market infrastructure has not been built in a robust enough way for the benefits of that sort of free market for agriculture to actually be demonstrated. So there is a lot that needs to be done in agriculture. I'm not entirely convinced that this set of reforms were necessarily the pathway forward, because it required a lot more actually state building markets at some level, states building infrastructure, thinking through the regulatory environment to get these right. All of these are things that are different across states and required states to do so. So maybe there is a corrective here in the sense that it is, as Dr. Hussain was just saying, now for states to pick up the mantle and move forward. Overall, it will take political courage for reforms. Our Prime Minister is known to take politically risky and politically big decisions. So the floor is open for him. I'm sure that there are many surprises in store for us between now and 2024, and electoral calculations will play a role. But I think now the ball is firmly in the court of states. It is for state governments to demonstrate, especially those that argue for deeper federalism, to demonstrate why deeper federalism is the future for India. And we also need to get away from templatizing the pathway for reform, because there is variance and there are deep complexities, as has also been said, in how we negotiate in private interests, farmer interests, big farmer interests, small interests, and so on.
No, so a fair point. I think, like GST in a sense, the three reforms or the three laws were seen as a starting point. Their implementation or the attempt to implement them, the method it was that was used to get everyone on board and not enough consensus being built upon has been discussed in the past. A U-turn has taken place, but is there an option to go back to the drawing room, to the drawing board at this point? That's really the big question. Also remember, right now agriculture in India and across the world has to be looked at in the context of climate change, our biggest challenge in this decade and in the next few to come. So we'll be watching this space. Meanwhile, thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the show this evening.